song, So Sweet. Like Manny said, I think that's an easy song to memorize, and actually an easy song to sing to the Lord when you're in private with Him. And just to start off with, the most basic and most essential relationship that we believers can have with our precious Lord Jesus is a relationship of love. And for this whole semester, try to use some chalk here. For this whole semester, we're tracing an arc through the whole Bible of the divine romance, right? So let's just say that's the whole Bible. And the theme is the divine romance. And starting with our first message, we saw what? Adam and Eve. Remember that? All the way through, and I think we'll get to that. That was in Genesis. And in Revelation, we'll eventually get to a universal wedding between God and man, between Christ and the church. And so this major theme through the whole Bible is what we're talking about. Some of us might have grown up and had a thought, well, as believers, I thought our relationship with God was supposed to be one of worship, right? And actually, John, I'll just put this in here. The Gospel of John 4:23 and 24 talks about God seeking worshipers, God seeking true worship. And that's right, and that's absolutely right. But something I discovered this week is that the Greek word for worship, did you know this? The Greek for worship translates to, get this, to kiss. When I heard that, I was blown away. To kiss the Lord is a way to worship Him, right? So can anyone recall who was here last week what the title of last week's message was? Let Him Kiss Me, right? So that was from the Song of Songs, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Let Him Kiss Me. Isn't this romantic? What kind of religion? We were on Christ versus religion last semester. What kind of religion teaches love in this kind of way? A divine love, a most holy love between God and man. So what we'd like to do is take this. Well, let me just recap a little bit because, anyways, who was not here last week? So few, right? So just to recap, and if you haven't watched these messages on YouTube, they're just classic. And it has to do with our practical relationship with God. And there's 6 words that our brother wrote up on the board. I think they went like this. It was, what, His mouth, His name, and His chambers. Okay, so let me set the scene just really briefly. What is the book of Song of Songs about? It's a seemingly obscure book in the Old Testament written by Solomon, King Solomon. He was the wisest, wealthiest person of the day. He built the temple of God. And in this poem, he was a poet. Actually, he wrote thousands of songs. He wrote thousands of proverbs. But this one, the Song of Solomon, is actually the Song of Songs, meaning it's the best song of them all. And the Song of Song in the short book tells a story of a king, actually King Solomon himself, coming out of his high position to woo a country girl, a maiden who had no status, right? But he loved her. And in response, over a number of chapters, this love relationship grew, right? And so the parallel here is, and how does it relate to us today? The interpretation is Solomon is Christ, right? And we are the poor, lowly country girl. And in this relationship with Christ, He has come to woo us, to win our hearts, and we respond by loving Him back. So these 6 words here, His mouth, has to do with the kisses of his mouth, right? And it's in such an intimate way that we would love him. Does anybody recall what his name, what we mentioned about his name last week? Ointment. His name is like ointment poured forth, meaning it's so fragrant, it's so charming. Actually, his name is just his person. So when we call Lord Jesus, we're just charmed by who he is. And then this is even deeper, his chambers. Anybody recall what his chambers are? This is all poetry. Think back. If you're in the sciences like me, we have to think back pretty hard to, interpreting poetry in high school English class. But what is his chambers referring to? This is a poetic way of expressing the most intimate place to contact God, and for us, that's in our human spirit, right? So that's a little bit of background of what we covered last week.